Hi friends. In this video, I want to talk to you about criminal justice reform, and specifically, I want to talk to you about this concept, qualified immunity. I think that we need to end qualified immunity for all law enforcement and government employees nationwide and replace it with something more reasonable. The social contract of this legal doctrine of qualified immunity required that the trust from the public is given so that the government would use their monopoly on violence in the best interests of justice and public safety. But instead, the government has participated in repeated, targeted cruelty, tyranny, violence, and oppression against some of the most vulnerable members of our society. Qualified immunity is a blanket excuse used to protect abusers who repeatedly break protocol, the law, and endanger their fellow officers and colleagues on an ongoing basis. This is because qualified immunity is assumed rather than granted. That means there has to be overwhelming evidence for it to be revoked. It sometimes does get revoked, but it is so difficult to prosecute that most prosecutors won't even try. This creates opportunities for abusers who want to exploit the system to sneak into it so that they can prey on others. That said, I understand that our members of law enforcement need legal protection so that they can do their jobs safely. I don't want to compromise that at all, but the immunity that is presumed today is much too great. I think we should replace it with something sensible that protects law enforcement officers who are acting in good faith, even if their actions are misunderstood by the public, and that targets and eliminates abusers from the system. Let's be clear. Very few people have a problem with the concept of law enforcement. If you respect the law, you want enforcement, but accountability matters. Holding irresponsible people accountable to their actions matters. Holding the very few, and let's be clear, it is very few abusers in the system accountable matters. No one is above the law. No one should be above the law. I will work to end qualified immunity and replace it with a concept I call reasonable immunity, which is a series of tests which are evaluated to determine if immunity should be granted. Under this legal doctrine, immunity is not assumed. In fact, there's an assumption that immunity should not be granted, but there's a series of tests that grant it. And the very first test is the most reasonable one that you can think of. Given this action, the training of this officer, the policies and procedures this officer was trained upon, and the situation this officer was involved in, would a reasonable person take the same actions in the same circumstances? That's a very reasonable, basic question. That's it. This is a question that can be adjudicated by a grand jury before a trial. A grand jury of that officer's peers. This doesn't need to be a complex trial process. We can think of it more like one of these subpoenas where the question isn't, is there enough evidence to go to trial? The first question is, should this officer be granted reasonable immunity? We have a jury pool. We bring in a community of people. They sit down. They look at the preponderance of evidence in the situation. They go, we think what the officer did was reasonable. Unanimous. Boom. Done. Out the door, right? But if there is a disagreement, okay, immunity is not granted. We go to trial, right? So there's a two-step process. One, that's a quick out for the officer, grants the immunity, lets them go home, move on with their life. Two, this one's a little complicated. We're going to take it to trial and adjudicate it with a jury of the peers. And even after that process, if we have accountability built into the system, people are forgiving, especially if they're law enforcement officers. If you find yourself in a situation where you make a mistake, you don't have immunity granted to you, you go to trial, you still get convicted, would your service come into account into your conviction, your sentencing? I think so, and I think it should. And when you come out and you apologize and you repent for that mistake and you go, and you maybe talk about it and go back out into the world and do your thing, I think people would cheer you on. I think people would be beside you and they would walk with you. So even if there is a journey where we have some accountability for our actions that kind of hold us back, there's a safety net we can build in here as well. I think that this kind of change to our system is safe, it's sensible, and it benefits everyone involved. It protects police who are acting in good faith. It makes the system hard for other people to abuse by filing false complaints, because it would just go to the grand jury and then get dismissed, right? Hey, this complaint, we looked at the evidence, there's no evidence here, throw it out the door, immunity granted. Or the officer acted in good faith. We saw that the officer acted in good faith, immunity granted, out the door. But it also hunts down and exposes the abusers who are hiding, who are acting in bad faith, who are there to exploit others, who are there to brutalize others, who are there for the thrill of it. We all know that they're in there. There's not many, but there's enough that they're spoiling the bunch. And I'd like to take those little bad apples out so they stop spoiling the bunch. Wouldn't you? Think about it. God bless, to good spirit and good fortune. Take care.